allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk.
Councilor Paul?
Present.
Councilor Edwards?
Present.
Councilor Janik?
Present.
Councilor Edwards?
Present.
Councilor deMedeiros?
Present.
Councilor Burke?
Present.
Councilor Milbourne?
Present.
All present.
Consent agenda. Approval of Town Council minutes, May 13, 2024. Regular meeting, Councilor Milbourne and deMedeiros abstain absent. May 13th, executive session, Councilor Milbourne, deMedeiros abstain absent. May 4th, special meeting, Councilor Milbourne abstains absent. May 4th, executive session, Councilor Milbourne abstains absent. Acknowledge receipts of minutes from boards, commissions, and committees. Political Control Committee 1, Zoning Board of Review 2, Planning Board 1. Acknowledge receipts of reports from Treasurer Saurette, April 2024 Budget and Revenue Reports. Acknowledge receipt of correspondence, letter from Peter Moniz regarding proposed amendments to the Semiquincentennial Commission resolution. Town of Hopkins, resolution in support of safety barrier on bridge over Narragansett Bay. Town of Charleston, resolution in support of amendment relating to water and navigation, harbors and harbor lines. Approval of tax assessor abatement, $22.35. Approval of the joint resolution of the towns of Burryville, Portsmouth, and Tiverton in support of education equity and property tax relief. Would anyone like to pull anything off? Councilor Burke?
A3.
Anyone else? I'd like to,
I make a motion to accept the rest of the consent agenda minus A3.
Second.
motion be made and second. All those in favor? Councilor Burke, A3.
Just a correction on page 3, the last paragraph before executive session, and I went back and double-checked to make sure I was right. It should be Councilor Burke motion that the town council respectfully advises the school committee by unanimous consent of the town council that we do not support the closure of any educational facility in the town of Tiverton. And I also, that was the motion, I believe the solicitor was also including that as one of the resolutions, yes or no?
That was in the order.
Yeah, yes, with that language.
The preliminary budget is.
With that language, yes.
Any discussion? Do I, is there a motion?
Motion to
change?
amend the minutes as discussed of May 4th.
Second.
Motion been made and second. All those in favor? Unanimous. Public comments. I'm not sure. I believe one of these people left anyway. Michael Buckout, is he still here?
No, he left. He was here for the...
Yeah, I talked to him. And Charles, and I can't read the last, Beach. Is that an E?
Beachton, Bowden?
Bowden,
Is there a Charles in the audience?
Recreation, Article 2. I think this is about fishing too. All right, they both left when they saw what was on the agenda. Appointments and resignations, Open Space and Land Preservation Commission. This is a 9-member board, 3-year term, 2 vacancies, terms ending 4/15/2027. Corey Alexander, 299 Anaquacket Road. Is Corey here? Come on up, Corey. You want to come up for a minute? It's no big deal. We're just going to ask you why you want to be back on the Open Space and Land. That's it.
Why do I want to be back on?
Why would you want to be back on? No.
It's so much fun. We did a lot of great stuff the last round. And
How long have you been on? A while.
3-4 years? I'm sorry.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, something like that. Any questions for Corey? I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve Corey Alexander for reappointment to the Open Space and Land Use Commission For a term ending on 4/15/2027. Reappointment, I thought I said that, yeah.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Welcome back, Corey.
Thank you.
Susan Rodriguez, I don't believe she's here.
No, she told me the other night that she couldn't make it.
All right. 80 Leonard Drive, request reappointment. I believe Susan's been on for quite some time
Yes.
also.
Make a motion to reappoint Susan Rodriguez of 80 Leonard Drive to the Open Space and Land Preservation Commission for a term ending 4/15/2027.
Second.
Motion's been made and second. All those in favor? Public hearing, discussion, and possible vote. Approval of proposed amendment to the Tiverton Code of Ordinance, Chapter 54, Parks and Recreation, Article 2, Recreation and Open Space Areas. This proposed ordinance will amend Section 5432, additional rules for recreational areas. The amendment will prohibit fishing at Fogland and Grinnell except in designated areas, and prohibit any fishing on the stone bridge, walkway, and abutment at all times. The ordinance also establishes fines for violations for fishing in non-designated areas. I'd like to entertain a motion to continue this until June 10th with an explanation with everything that's been going on, and the lawyer and the committee so busy. We have gotten a lot of suggestions. We are meeting very soon, and we're going to put it all together and put it on the next meeting.
Second.
Motion's been made and second. All those in favor? Approval of the proposed amendments to Tiverton Code of Ordinance, Chapter 78, Traffic and Vehicles, Article 3, Stopping, Standing, and Parking. The proposed new ordinance would establish the regulation of vehicle beach parking at Grinnell's and Fogland and require parking fees or passes from May 1st to October 1st, and provide for the enforcement of parking restrictions, including recreation vehicles at Fogland Beach. The ordinance also prohibits parking at any town beach from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and sets fines for violation of the parking restrictions. This I'm also asking to move to June 10th for the reasons I said previously. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Motion been made and second. All those in favor? Okay. Council President deMedeiros, Council Workshop, discussion to review following proposed zoning amendments. Amendments to Appendix A zoning ordinance Article 3, 4, 7, and 9, and to adopt a new zoning map. These amendments generally adopt a new R120 zoning district, which will replace the R80 zoning district and expand to portions of current 40 and 60 zoning districts. 2, amendments to Article A zoning ordinance, Articles 2 and 5 to create Article 26. These amendments will adopt conservation development projects, a zoning and planning tool that required subdivisions and land development projects of 4 or more units or lots to implement certain design criteria necessary to preserve the town's diminishing natural resources, in particular water. I was asked by the committee that's worked really hard on this to come forward to us before the public hearing in 2 weeks, just so we get some understanding of what's going on before we have the public hearing. So this is not a public hearing, this is just a presentation. Who would like to come up? There's a whole bunch of you, so. Yeah, so who, we have Trish, we have Stu. So Stu, Trish.
Yeah,
All right.
we'll be doing slides
need
to
that
accompany
down?
our brief remarks.
Stu, you put the tie on for this?
Yes,
This is serious business.
I wear a suit for planning board.
Yes, he does.
I wore my shorts.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm Stu Hardy,
I don't want anybody.
the chair of the planning board, and I'd like to introduce our panel, including Ashley Sweet, of course, our interim planner and AO, Tricia Hilton, who is the vice chair of the planning board, and we also have Todd Romano, our planning board legal counsel, to field any legal questions, and also a special guest, Dr. Lorraine Joubert, from a URI Cooperative Extension Service. She manages something called the NEMO program, which provides information to municipal officials about water and soil in particular. And Lorraine is no stranger to Tiverton. She presided over a joint workshop of the Planning Board and the Town Council just before COVID struck. And she went over many of the same issues she'll be addressing tonight. So, having said that, I'd just like to give you a brief overview. We're proposing two zoning initiatives based on recommendations in Tiverton's Comprehensive Community Plan, which is also supported by the state guide plan element, Land Use 2025. That's the document that sets land use guidelines for all communities in Rhode Island. And so we're consistent with that. So the first initiative is the conversion of all of the existing R80, that's residential 80,000 square foot, R80 zoning district, and parts of the existing R40 and R60 districts into a new R120 residential zoning district. And in R120 is approximately 2 3/4 acre in size. So it's a tad shorter, smaller than 3 acres. The second initiative builds upon the existing rural residential zoning program, and the idea here is to develop a conservation development zoning program that will be adding conservation development best management practices to protect soil and water quality and natural features with high ecological and scenic value. So those are the two initiatives that we have before us this evening. Now, at the beginning of this year, as you all know, Town Council enacted a temporary moratorium, a 6-month moratorium on subdivisions larger than 4 lots. And the idea behind that was to provide the Planning Board and also the Zoning Revision Committee with some time to look into how this surge in residential development that we've been facing can be better managed, particularly so that we don't overburden our town infrastructure such as our roadway system, our water and sewer system, our schools. So that moratorium, as you know, is still in effect, but it's coming to an end. And so we were tasked with coming up with something, and these two initiatives are what we have come up with that we think will achieve that goal of better managing growth, residential growth, which is inevitable and which is desirable. So the town now has approximately 7,600 housing units, and that's according to Rhode Island Housing. They were just in Chris Cotta's office about a week ago. And so 7,600 units, but the Planning Board has approved or is in the process of approving units that have not yet been built, or maybe they're under construction now, and that totals to another 826 housing units. Now that's an 11, if my math is correct, an 11 or 10% or 11% expansion of the current housing stock that we have now, which will result in increased pressure on our town infrastructure, including traffic, school attendance, demand on water and sewer. So the two initiatives that we're presenting tonight will enable the town to better manage the growth of new residential development including affordable housing, without overwhelming infrastructure, causing unacceptable levels of pollution, or diminishing our small-town character and quality. Most importantly, it will help to conserve and protect a critical and limited resource in Tiverton, drinking water, as you'll hear about later. So both of the initiatives that we're discussing tonight implement recommendations in the current comprehensive community plan, which we adopted and the state approved in 2018. The plan's overall section, the sort of the summary section of the plan at the very beginning, includes something called a vision for Tiverton, quote unquote, which states in part, and I'm quoting, "The protection of the sources of the town's water supply is a major concern. Protection areas should be carefully guarded around Stafford Pond and Nonquit Pond. Future residential growth, while providing for affordable housing opportunities throughout town, should consist of density compatible with the existing conditions, available infrastructure, and varying housing styles." And that can be found in section 3.2 on pages 16 and 17. So specifically, the chapters entitled Natural and Cultural Resources, Land Use, Open Space, Coastal Resources and Recreation contain at least 16 goals and action items that support less residential development and conservation design of new developments. Finally, these zoning initiatives have been a collaborative effort, including a number of people. They were reviewed and approved by the Zoning Revision Committee, as well as the Planning Board. Ashley and Todd also contributed many planning and legal improvements, while Lorraine Joubert provided essential environmental input. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to turn the floor over to Tricia Hilton.
Good evening, everybody. So right now, the most pressing problem of all of this development is really the water capacity. And the water issue is an issue of not just quantity, but also quality. So in terms of quantity, the water capacity right now of the two water districts, the public water districts we have, is uncertain. There's an effort going on, and Chris undertook this to work with the two water districts and the State Water Resources Board and some available grant money to try and do some hydrologic modeling to figure out exactly what the capacity of the water districts is and where they are. We do know anecdotally that one of the water districts recently sent a letter to a potential developer indicating that based on where they were on their pumping capacity, they would not be able to provide water for that development. So we have to know this. We can't continue to approve developments that are going to rely on public water if we're not sure that the water districts can actually, perform on that decision. The sewer capacity is also a little bit uncertain. Both the water districts and the sewer districts have districts that were granted to them by the state legislature, but there are limitations on the growth. There are also limitations vis-a-vis USDA grant money, which is the single largest, most important source of financing for both the water and sewer districts, because they're limited by population. So if we develop beyond that population, that raises another issue. In terms of the non-public water and non-public sewer, which is most of the town, which relies on private wells, we have no aquifers here. We have fractured bedrock, and when you drill a well, you end up in one of those fractures. How big that fracture is, how much water it can produce, is not something that is generally known. If additional houses are built in that same fracture, you may lose all of your water, you may lose some of your water. It's not as though there's this underground supply of water that's infinite, and we know that you can simply keep, drilling into those fractures and have unlimited water. The next component to all of this is water quality. In Tiverton, water quality is a difficult thing because we don't have great soil for water quality. This is, for those of you who are not familiar with how a septic system works, this is a very quick overview. Because when it comes to those fractures in the bedrock, that groundwater that we have, a certain percentage of it comes from the sky, it falls out of the sky, percolation, it percolates into the groundwater. Another significant percentage that comes from, in fact, septic leachate, which sounds kind of gross at first, but the system, if it's maintained properly, actually works. This is a little diagram that shows that septic leachate will, it leaves your house. There's some conditioning done in a septic tank. It goes to the drain field. And then, as you can see, it sort of percolates through the soil where it's somewhat treated and eventually ends up back in the groundwater. And depending on where it is in the groundwater, it may or may not flow towards your well. Ideally, if it's doing that, that water is, potable. It's drinkable. And this system can work very effectively provided that layer in there that says wastewater treatment in soil is dry enough and effective enough to be able to be that filtering sponge. So when you have septic leachate, good quality soil and wooded upland will take out of the septic leachate the things that are going to cause a problem. So plant life, trees, shrubs, they will take up the nitrogen and phosphorus and use it as fertilizer for their own growth. There are microbes in the earth that will get rid of the harmful bacteria and viruses that come out of septic leachates, and so that, again, by the time that water reaches the groundwater, it's drinkable. That's the ideal system. In Tiverton, that system's a bit of a challenge. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a challenge because of the conditions that we have here. So this is a map of the state, and it's a map of soils in the state. And we don't have to go through the entire legend, but I'll just tell you that basically the light pink and the light purple and the pale green are all pretty good stuff. Those are areas where the soil is good for septic systems. There's enough good quality soil to be able to filter groundwater, to be able to filter septic leachate really effectively before it gets to the groundwater. And so you can see in most of the state, there's some red and yellow, but there's a lot of pink and green and all of that. And then you look over at Tiverton and Little Compton, and we're in a whole nother category. The vast majority of our soil falls into the C or D range, and those are soils that are poor, truly poor for septic systems. They have high runoff, they have high water tables, seasonal high water tables, restrictive hard pan, and a lot of it is hydric. I mean, frankly, that's just wet. And if you look at that, you can see that the few little areas that we have, they're actually in the better category. There's a little bit of pale yellow and a little bit of pale green, some over by Saudi Pond, and there's some pale green up in northwest Tiverton. The bedrock that you can see, if you think about the Pecasset Ridge, that bedrock follows the Pecasset Ridge, down through Weedamo Woods. But when you look at the rest of it, this is not great soil for septic systems. So we have to be careful not to saturate that sponge with too many septic systems, because once you do that, then you really affect the quality of your groundwater. So now it's not just a matter of how much groundwater is in those fractures, it's also whether or not that groundwater is drinkable. All but one of our freshwater water bodies has been assessed by DEM, and every single one of them is on the impaired water body list.
Mine is Wetline Rook.
That's a warning that we're maybe not doing the best job that we can do in terms of taking care of ground and surface water. The two that have stars, Nonquit and Stafford Pond, are both drinking water supplies. And they both have what are known as TMDLs, which is a total maximum daily load remediation program. Stafford's has been in place since the late 1990s, and it's still an impaired water body. So it's a tough thing to manage, but this will give you a clue that, we're not doing a great job. So, one of the potential solutions in terms of managing the development so that we do have enough drinking water in those veins and that water is potable is to move to a larger lot size. It works in companion with the conservation development that you're going to hear about later. I would encourage you to consider these two things as interlocking because one without the other doesn't really do that much. But we are recommending the creation of this new R120 district. It's 120,000 square feet, roughly 2.75 acres for a single-family home. It will replace all of R80, a portion of R60, a portion of R40, and it also establishes a new density requirement for multifamily housing that would require more land per unit than our current standard. You can go, Ashley. Is the next slide the map? Oh, you want to skip back to the? Oh, I'm going to ask Ashley. This is one of the things that we're sure we're going to get a lot of questions about, which is if everybody becomes R120, what happens to conformance?
So if you are changing your district, obviously you're gonna have a series of lots that have been created under your 80,000 square foot requirement. Now you're changing that zoning requirement to something that's larger. Those 80,000 square foot lots would be considered pre-existing legal, non-conforming lots of record. But the state just, if you recall, passed a law that those lots that are considered non-conforming lots are going to get this automatic reduction in their dimensional requirements. So any lot that's in this 120 zoning district, although it is considered a non-conforming lot because it has less than the minimum zoning requirement, is going to get this proportional reduction that is in the state law. And we used a very easy example here, where if you had a 60,000 square foot lot in a 120,000 square foot zoning district, that lot is 50% of the dimensional requirement. So all of its setbacks get a 50% dimensional reduction, and its lot coverage gets a 50% automatic increase. That's easy math, but it's essentially the same thing for any lot that's proportionally missing a percentage of the acreage requirement. So if you're only conforming by 30%, we do the math, you get your proportional reduction of your setbacks, you get to have more lot coverage than you would normally have under normal circumstances. So this will essentially compensate for those lots that are in the district that would then be considered non-conforming lots. They'll be able to get this automatic proportional reduction. So they would not, if that proportional reduction gives them what they would need to add their deck, put their shed where they'd want to, they will not have to go get dimensional relief just because the zoning district would have changed and considered them to be non-conforming.
And that's generally the biggest concern for people who already have a house, like, I don't want to,
You can point the finger at me.
Yeah, no, well, listen, Denise lives in I live in a non-conforming house. I mean, when you see the map, I'm going to show you something about conforming that might be a surprise. So just to let you know that we are not on the bleeding edge here of all of this, we're actually being a little conservative. These are all the other municipalities in Rhode Island that have residential zones that are 120,000 square foot and larger. We're actually fairly conservative here, and we're a little bit behind the curve. I mean, you can see that towns like North Kingstown have 3 different residential zones, one that's 120, another one that's 200, another one that's 5 acres. A lot of them are at the full 3 acres. And almost all these towns are doing this for exactly the same reason that we're doing it, which is to protect their groundwater supplies. So we had to divide the map up into 2 because we wanted you to be able to see. But before I go any further, do you see the cross-hatching around Stafford Pond? Most people don't know this, but that cross-hatching has been 3-acre zoning since 2001. The watersheds were rezoned to 3-acre zoning, the primary portions of the watershed, back in 2001. So, and when you see the southern part of town, you'll see that it's quite a bit. Also, if you look sort of in the new R120 area and you see all those little lots, there is an enormous percentage of Tiverton that is already pre-existing non-conforming. I'm going to guess that probably somewhere around 70% of the town, one way or the other, is pre-existing non-conforming. But as Ashley said, as long as you can get that setback relief so that you don't have an issue when you want to put an addition on or a deck or whatever it is, then it doesn't really matter. So just from the north part to compare the difference, you can see that, R30 pretty much stays the same. The industrial zone, all of that, the commercial zones all stay the same. That section of R60 that wrapped around Stafford Pond would now be converted to R120. And you'll notice that there's a section of R40. It's west of Fish Road, but east of Highland. There's quite a bit of vacant land in there, very, very large lots. A great deal of it is owned, to be honest, by the Tiverton Rod and Gun Club, and not that they have any intention or have ever said anything about developing it, but, it is technically right now zoned at R40, and if for some reason they ever in the future decided that they wanted to, it would be developable as R40, which is why we're recommending that be converted to R120. And then if we look at the southern section of the map, again, you can see the cross-hatching in blue, which is the Nonquit Pond watershed district. And again, the primary portion of that is already at 3 acres. And then the rest of the R80 district would be converted to R120. And again, as Stu said, currently it's at 2 acres. We'd be going to 2.75 acres. Ashley, can you go back to the map for 1 second? The one thing that I do want to The one thing I do want to mention a little bit is the R30 zone. Because we looked long and hard at the R30 zone to see, if there were options for changing the zoning there too. But the truth is that the R30 zone is so developed that there just isn't. There are essentially 2 sizable parcels left, one of which is 1/3 of it is owned waterfront, and they're not contiguous. So you'd have to spot zone them, which is not legal to try and do anything about the zoning. And most of the rest of what's available in R30 is really infill lots, a lot here, a lot there, a piece here, but there's really only those 2 bigger parcels. But and Ashley and I can talk about this a little bit more, but what we did really do to focus to try and, because we are concerned again with the amount of development that the water and sewer districts are looking at, the thing that's a little bit more of a worry is redevelopment with the multifamily proposition, where someone purchases something existing that's slightly larger, that's developed, knocks it down, and proposes multifamily development. We have increased the land requirements for multifamily, so you would not be able to generate the same number of units under conservation development that you're able to generate on a multifamily development today. And with that, we're going to ask Lorraine to talk a little bit about our relationship with the state and DEM and standards.
Thank you very much, Trish. And thank you, Stu, for the kind introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. I really enjoy working with your town because so many times I come here and I make recommendations, and so often the recommendations are accepted and positive changes are made, and that doesn't happen in all the towns for certain. So I wanted to briefly cover why large lot zoning is not enough, why we can't depend on DEM standards to protect water quality on their own, and why DEM relies on municipalities to address the cumulative impacts of land use, and why conservation development is so important. I need a clicker. Oh, okay. So I'm going to start with some examples where those communities and those watershed areas have the same type of soil and bedrock conditions as Tiverton: hard pan, dense tills, and fractured bedrock. So Situate Reservoir, a long time ago, adopted large lot zoning in Situate, 2 3/4 acres, Foster, 4.6 acres, Gloucester, 3.3 to 4 acres, and extensive areas were protected as open space by Providence Water, which is depicted in the light green. Despite that large lot zoning and mostly low-density residential, Situate Reservoir watershed has a serious problem with impaired waters. Large lot zoning has not prevented that impairment. And part of the problem is when you have a 2, 3, or 4 acre lot, you can clear the whole thing, or you can bring in animals, and you could farm it. You could go almost up to the wetland itself without a buffer based on DEM agricultural regulations for wetlands. And so these open areas are highly developed in terms of nutrient input from farming and agriculture and other types of activities where there's land disturbance. You could go in and clear your entire lot and not necessarily plant anything if you wanted to have horses. So if you look at the tributaries and water bodies that are yellow, orange, or red, those are classified as impaired, which means they are not meeting DEM water quality standards, such as A, B, or C. It doesn't mean they're not drinkable. When the water flows into the reservoir, it's probably diluted somewhat, and there's a treatment facility that treats the water, just like the water that you get here from your local water suppliers is treated to make it acceptable. A classic example of treating impaired water is the Newport water system. Their water, much of it runs across urban paved streets, ends up in open impoundments, and they have a state-of-the-art wastewater, drinking water treatment system that's capable of treating that water. Another example is West Greenwich and Coventry, where they also have large lots, 2 acres in West Greenwich and larger in Coventry, but they have difficulty finding adequate water quantity even on those large lots, to the point where they were getting so many applications for development and building permits where they didn't have sufficient water that they adopted a well testing ordinance they adopted the ordinance that requires well testing to determine adequate yield before they issue a building permit. And that is adopted in both of these towns and has been there for some time now. And again, they have the same type of soils and bedrock conditions as your town. So why isn't large lot zoning enough in addition to those issues? Well, 2 acre lot size was often adopted to provide setbacks between septic systems and wells. And one of the reasons is if you have a polluted water going into the ground, the soil filters it. If you have runoff, which is pretty much polluted, surface runoff running over the ground, and it seeps into the ground, the vegetation and soil also filter it. So maintaining that type of natural vegetation is important. But where there's a lot of runoff, it doesn't get filtered. It goes directly to local drainage ways and water bodies. And as a result, stormwater runoff is considered the #1 problem in Rhode Island as well as nationally. And you can see the brown areas are confirmed to be impaired by DEM, and the orange streams are, and larger watersheds are either confirmed or potential.
What's the blue? What's other?
Those are either not evaluated or they are meeting the standards.
Okay.
So why is this happening, that it's such a prevalent problem? As I mentioned, when you have a natural environment like the one on the left, when rain falls and water runs over the land, the vegetation picks up the nutrients and uses it. It seeps into the ground and is filtered, and it maintains groundwater recharge. And that groundwater feeds the streams in the low flow conditions in the summer to maintain healthy streams. When we develop, we basically reverse that equation. So a downtown center or a more developed urban, like a high-density residential neighborhood, would have runoff of at least 55%. We pretty much bypass groundwater recharge, reduces it to about 15%. So it's reversing the natural hydrologic cycle. Now, the main question is, why isn't DEM overseeing all of this? Well, DEM has limited authority, and it's focused on controlling pollution sources and activities in wetlands, that kind of thing. And it's the communities that the community planning that can do the community planning and are authorized to do community planning and the related resource protection. So DEM doesn't have the authority to determine how dense or how developed something should be. And in the middle picture, you see that the local authorities also are responsible for the design of development projects, whether it's large lot or compact with more pollution controls on the surface. And then finally, on the third part of the picture, municipalities have the ability to include small treatment systems in development plans, whereas the state can only ensure the proper design of those stormwater treatment systems. So DEM sets the minimum standards, but it relies on towns to address more specific site design that handles these types of on-the-ground decisions to infiltrate water and treat it through these vegetated best management practices. And no matter what the town approves, DEM cannot override local zoning or land use decisions. So if you allow a subdivision with 40-foot roads, no vegetated treatment systems, they would have to approve it. And the final one is a little bit shocking to me because it's only something I learned a little bit recently, is that when you have a subdivision application coming before you, it goes through stages of review, as you know, conceptual, and then master plan, and then preliminary. So by the time you get to preliminary, that's when the engineering design is established. By then, it's far too late to make changes to the concept design. You'd have to go back to the drawing board and months of work, as you all know. And DEM does not see any of these stormwater plans until preliminary. So it's impossible to make any changes. DEM can't make changes at that point. So it's it's imperative to incorporate better design at the most initial stages.
Can I just make one clarification, because I want to make sure this is clear, because we've had this issue come up.
Okay.
Where your second bullet point, DEM does not have the authority to override local zoning or land use decisions. However, the local authority doesn't have the ability to override DEM regulations as to setbacks from water sources, wetlands, and those type of issues.
They adopted legislation a while back that prevents towns from increasing wetland buffers. Agreed. Next slide, please. So here's just an example of a conservation development versus conventional. The one on the upper right is 9 half-acre lots that are more compact, the roads are narrower, they've maintained a lot of the trees and other vegetation, and then they reserved the rest of the property as undeveloped conservation land. So it's protecting all the land that you see in light green. It's surprising to me, but the other development, the conventional one on the lower end, is much newer, and that's straight 2-acre lot development, cookie cutter style with no protected open space. So I really don't understand what's happening, because I think we saw many more cluster developments, and very good ones, when it was first introduced, but somehow I think new planners came in, they weren't as familiar with the issues, and we're seeing more of these conventional style developments, unfortunately. Finally, DEM is concerned about stormwater runoff, obviously, and as part of the permits that municipalities have, the MS4 permit that helps them manage stormwater runoff, DEM has asked all municipalities to complete this checklist called LID Site Planning and Design Techniques, which our office developed with DEM. And it's a checklist to show you how good your ordinances and regulations are in terms of resource protection, water quality protection. And the very first question is, does your community have conservation development? Because that is the single most important way that you can protect open space, by permanently preserving a chunk of it and leaving smaller portions for the landowners themselves. And in other states that have these kinds of things, the ones I've seen, conservation development is always the first item on the list.
So
That's-
I'm going to give you a little bit of an
Thank you.
overview of what conservation development is by starting with what you have in Tiverton right now. So you, in Article 8, as Tricia mentioned, you have your watershed protection overlay district, which applies to Stafford and Nonquit Pond. This was adopted in 2001. It's an old ordinance, and it requires 3-acre zoning in the primary zone, and then it requires 100,000 square feet per unit in the secondary zone of Nonquit Pond. But this essentially just acts as large lot zoning, and we've basically just explained why that in itself is not sufficient to protect the natural resource of both Stafford and Nonquit Ponds. You also have rural residential development. This is there's three different types of subdivision that you can do through a rural residential development. It consists of a rural frontage subdivision, a rural compound, and a rural subdivision. Only the rural subdivision requires the set aside of open space at 50%, and then that is then restricted to a 50% density that you would be allowed under conventional subdivision. And then the frontage and compound types of rural residential development have no open space set-aside requirements. They're developed at conventional density. And the frontage subdivision or the frontage rural residential development is permitted to flex the zoning requirements so you can shrink your frontage and actually have smaller lots. You're set at the conventional density. You can't get more lots than you would under conventional zoning, but you can shrink your lots. So what you essentially have here within the rural residential development is all the components of conservation development, but in bits and pieces and not working together as one type of development functioning as conservation development. So conservation development is a flexible design process to accommodate growth, essentially to minimize those impacts to the natural environment and community character. We talked a lot about why large lot zoning is just not enough. The basic principle behind conservation development is that you get high quality and quantity protection of open space and natural resources. There is a 10-step site design process that's built in to conservation development, and that is first and foremost putting resource protection at the top of the design process, basically directing development where it's most suitably located. This is not a new concept. This has been around for a long time in the planning world, started by Randall Arendt, who was a Rhode Islander. Rhode Island has a conservation design manual. There's an example here of North Carolina having a conservation subdivision handbook. You can Google this and you'll find all over the the country, there are these handbooks and design guides for conservation development everywhere. So this is, again, not a new concept. This is something that has been tried and tested throughout the country over the last, 30+ years. So what we are proposing here is to add a section. We're going to amend a couple of different sections to make sure that there's consistency throughout the zoning ordinance for conservation development, but the actual conservation development itself would be added as a new section, Article 26. This would apply to developments creating 4 or more units or lots. The conservation development is essentially based on the premise of a yield plan, which is where you would design your subdivision under conventional zoning requirements, which will give you your yield or your number of units or number of lots that you're permitted. The conservation development is density neutral. So whatever you get under normal zoning conditions is what you get under conservation development. If you can, under normal zoning, you get 10 lots, under conservation development, you get 10 lots. It's density neutral. 50% of the developable land area is to be set aside as open space. As I mentioned, there is a 10-step design process that you go through with the applicant that is built into the subdivision process, essentially. And we have also included provisions for multifamily developments, as Tricia had initially mentioned. Wanted to just give you some very quick examples. These are also in the Rhode Island Conservation Design Manual. This is your, traditional farm, existing conditions. Under normal circumstances, you would get a subdivision that would cut this up into whatever the zoning is, whether this is 2 or 3 or 5 acre house lots. You install the road. You can see in this scenario, the farm is essentially gone. And this has been developed into a residential subdivision that looks pretty typical of what we're accustomed to seeing. Under conservation development, the farm is actually retained. It's actually underneath the words conservation development, but I promise you it's there. The farm stays, the farm fields stay, a lot of the vegetation stays, the roads are a lot shorter, the house lots are all clustered. All of these homes actually either back up to or look out onto permanently protected open space, which causes them to retain their value, even more so than those 2, 3, or 5 acre lots that I showed you in that slide. They're actually more valuable. There was a study done that shows that those lots are worth more than those lots. So that's what you get out of a conservation development. How does this impact you on a town-wide scale? This is what you would expect to see along major roadways. That's where we typically start to develop first, is along the major roadways that run through your town. And what ends up happening traditionally is that we begin to branch off of those major roadways and we essentially start to fragment what's in between and break up those, those areas by putting in these subdivision roads that in a lot of cases don't connect to anything, but essentially, like I said, fragment the land. And this is the kind of development pattern that we end up seeing. And this is a Tiverton example of what happens. This is a 1951-52 aerial, and you can see on the right in 2023 is exactly what happened, that in the 50s we were building along those major roadways, and by 2023 we had put in these roads to nowhere, basically, that side roads that we then built houses along those side roads and started to fragment that land that now are not connected to anything. And we have these subdivision roads that kind of just dead end and don't necessarily connect to anything. But under the principle of conservation development, these roads loop back onto main roads and we can keep this the land in between the development can stay connected, and we can keep major areas of land interconnected as interconnected green space. We can also preserve that area for drinking water recharge, groundwater recharge, habitat. So that's how conservation development can really make an impact on a larger town-wide scale. So what conservation development does, it preserves the highest valued natural resources on the property first. It reduces the impacts to the land, to the ecological resources and the natural habitat. It actually reduces the cost of development. It costs less to build a conservation subdivision because you're building less road, you're building less infrastructure in terms of the sidewalk that goes with the road. You're putting in less in terms of stormwater infrastructure. So it actually costs less money to build a conservation subdivision than it does to build a conventional subdivision. And then at the end of the day, it costs the town less to maintain that infrastructure because you've got less feet of road to maintain, you've got less drainage infrastructure to maintain, you've got less road to plow, you've got less garbage to pick up, and all the other things that go along with the eventual maintenance of what gets handed over to you once it gets developed. So at the end of the day, it costs everybody less money. You end up, as I said, with lots that are taxed and valued higher because conservation development lots are lots that abut or sit facing out onto permanently protected open space. Those lots in that original subdivision that I showed you abut someone else's land that eventually is going to get developed in the same type of subdivision, whereas the lots in the conservation subdivision are going to stay next to permanently protected open space in perpetuity. So those lots hold their value better than those subdivision lots that are cut at 2-3 acres that are adjacent next to someone else's property that's also going to do the same type of development. They also provide opportunities for interconnected green space when you properly design conservation subdivisions. The planning board has opportunities to look at where that green space is and to make a concerted effort to line up the open space so that you can get these kind of interconnected green space networks. So if we have better site design, we get higher value. And when we're talking about higher value, that means a lot of things. It means taxes. It means a higher real estate value for the people that own the lots, for the people that developed the lots. We get a higher environmental value for the property. We get a higher scenic value for the property. There's a higher wildlife value for the property. That open space has a higher value. And there's a higher neighborhood character. You can just inherently see that by looking at these two different developments on the same piece of property, that green space and that neighborhood just feels better. It's a better design, and it's going to translate to a higher value in a lot of different ways. What conservation does not do, it does not reduce development density. It is density neutral. It does not reduce the value of the lots. Just because the lot is smaller does not mean it's worth less money. And it does not force small lot sizes in all instances. It actually provides additional flexibility because it doesn't mean that you have to make all the lots smaller, but you can make them smaller. So it gives the developer the ability to look at what their overall density of development is, how small can they make the lots in that district, and then they can start to design different lot sizes and they can make the developments more interesting. So instead of those cookie cutters where everything is 2 acres, all the houses are in the same place, they're all facing the same direction, it forces some creativity, and I think you'll find that you'll get better subdivision design. It also does not cost the developer more time or money. I will say in the beginning, there's a learning curve, but it's a 10-step design process. It's laid out in the subdivision regulations. Once we start to do it, we'll get the hang of it, and it will become second nature, and at the end of the day, it will not cost more money, it will not cost more time for the developer. And that's all we have for you. We're happy to answer any questions you have.
I would like to answer one common question, though, that's, in case nobody asks this. Conservation development under our proposal only applies to a subdivision that is 4 units or more. So for somebody who's got, a lot and they want to subdivide it into 3 lots, or they want to give their kids, each a lot, 3 lots or less is not subject to conservation development and can still be done in the traditional way. So this is only for new subdivisions 4 and up.
And Todd reminded me to mention to you that, I think 19, the last number I saw was, okay, so 20 other communities in Rhode Island have adopted conservation development. Yes.
Any questions from the council? John?
So in one of your slides, you mentioned the non-quit watershed, and then there was like this 100,000 square foot minimum for the secondary area. Where is that?
So the.
Because I looked at the map and I don't see it delineated anywhere.
It's not mapped.
I'd just like to know if I'm somehow sucked into this thing.
It's
It's not you.
portion is everything that's within 2,000 feet of the pond's edge, plus anything that's within 500 feet of a perennial stream as identified on the U.S. Geological Survey map. So, yeah, I know. And
So it's essentially the watershed district, but that the watershed overlay is divided into 2 categories based
Yeah,
on distance.
And the trunk of the watershed district that goes up
Mm-hmm.
towards Bulwer Marsh Road, it's basically 500 feet from Borden Brook, Quacket Creek, a couple of unnamed tributaries that are in there, but basically that stream that runs down the ridge line,
Yep.
everything that's 500 feet from any of those streams is in the primary 2.
Okay. But everything that's outside, that's still on that overshed, that waterway overshed, that would be the secondary. Okay. So in theory, if you're at East Road almost to Lake, you might be 100,000, not 3 acres.
Now, yeah.
No.
Cool.
Any other questions? We just did this so you'd be educated when we do this with the public, and if there was any questions we had, we'd have our opportunity. Go ahead.
Stu, in your list of housing,
Yes.
did you include Oxford in its present iteration or take it out?
What?
I included it because it has gone through master plan approval. Now, we haven't heard from the developer, and we now know that the owner of that lot, this is the Trilogy, it's roughly a 9-acre lot of land at the corner of Sousa in Maine that sort of surrounds where the Seasons gas station application is. The owner is actually Trilogy, and Trilogy is now in discussion with Rhode Island Energy, formerly National Grid, to turn that land over as a storage lot for building materials. So the planning office has not heard anything. Actually, am I wrong about that? I don't believe you've heard anything, but it appears that Oxford has gone away. Nevertheless, we did include the 69 units simply because something is going to be done with that land sooner
It's
or later.
included because it has a master plan approval that is a good approval, and they could come back tomorrow, so it's part of that number. It's a valid approval at this time. It's in the proposed category.
Well, that's why I asked, because,
Yeah.
the rumor is, well, not the rumor, the ownership has changed, and they may in
They
fact.
haven't withdrawn their application.
No, they haven't,
And
but-
their approval hasn't expired, so it's within the 699 units. It's counted within that, yes.
Anybody else? Yep.
Is this presentation available to the public that you did today, tonight?
This,
It could be, it could be. We could put it on the website.
Public record now, so.
We could put it on the website. And it'll also be on the cable, it'll be on cable too.
And YouTube.
And YouTube and everything else.
Just the document, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to thank all of you for educating us. We knew from our, from our recent conversations around water that we have a water problem. This just highlights it even more so. And I think, as we go through this process, we need to make some decisions that will help us protect our water, make sure we have adequate sewage systems and the like, and protect our environment. So thank you.
Just as I'm sorry, I didn't know if you wanted to speak before.
No,
me.
I was just going to say thank you all. And I think
I
it's,
didn't see Deb's hand.
I think it's important, too, that it's not just the developments that are coming, but we need to protect the water for everyone who's here now, too, because these developments, if they're not done appropriately, can negatively impact everyone else who's already here, the water and the sewage and the quality of water as well as the amount of water that's available.
John?
Yeah, so as it relates to the amendments to Appendix A on the zoning ordinances, obviously we have a number of use tables. I went through and highlighted a bunch of stuff. I'm assuming we're going to get into that in the public hearing because it looks to me, again, at first blush, like a number of things were changed, but it wasn't redlined in what was changed, for instance, to no from permissible from special use permit in some of these. And so I don't know if,
On the use tables, John?
yeah, when we get into them, like if we're going to, some were underlined, but I again.
There's a red,
Councilor, don't forget that we changed all the special uses to no.
Right,
in November
back
of
way,
last
Ah,
long
fair
time
point.
ago.
Okay.
That's probably why they're not read, yeah.
So, but I mean, obviously, we're going to have to revisit all of these tables, I'm assuming, and we will do so after the public hearing before we pass the ordinance, right?
Well, yeah.
We'll have a bite at that apple?
Well, no, we'll pass the ordinance. Explain the procedure. We'll pass the ordinance, and then,
We'll have the public hearing and then.
So there's an ordinance to change the district use tables to reflect the change from R80 to R120.
right,
And then you're also including we're proposing in the ordinance at least, a new use of a three-family dwelling and separating out the multifamily structure and clarifying that is 4 or more units. And separating it, I mean, those that have public water and sewer versus those that don't.
Yep.
But that's the only
that would be the only.
change to the
yeah.
district use table, really.
So that's the only thing that we could swing at in
no,
this?
actually, we have other ordinances that were not on the agenda tonight, the two others which define prohibited uses and other things. That's not part of the information tonight, but that's going to be on 624 as well. You've got four different ordinances.
Okay, and then, again, the reason why I ask is because I know the voters in this town approved something, the cannabis shops, and that's listed as a no across the board.
That's-
But obviously, if the voters approve and we have a secondary
Well,
ordinance
we're
that would
waiting for
change
the planning
that.
board's recommendation on that because that was sent back to
Right.
them.
Okay.
So that's a different
It's a
ordinance.
whole different,
And that's on 624, the cannabis. 624, so that'll also be on 624.
So I guess my
But it's a
question
different
is,
issue.
my question is this, is if this is in front of us with all these use tables, could we actually
That's not the
go?
ordinance on the cannabis. There's a separate ordinance on
Okay.
cannabis.
No, but I mean, not cannabis specifically, but like we have all these
but the,
these
So
special
that will be up.
uses.
that
We
night
can talk
for-
about
yeah.
everything in here.
Absolutely,
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
okay.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Apologies for being
Let me tell you this,
unclear.
though. The zoning ordinance committee, which I believe Councilor Edwards is on, and the North Tiverton committee, they've both been working very hard, and they're making recommendations to the town council soon, is my understanding, regarding changes,
To this.
the uses that were special use back to either special use, permitted or not permitted.
Yeah, I think that's
So that's
what-
coming down
I think
the
that's
pike
what
for
John's
you.
talking about.
Yeah, because I seem to remember at some point we received notice of this and there was a bunch of bullet points of like, hey, we're going to eliminate, gas stations, as an example, as a thing in this town.
That's well, that's going to be, that's still in the district use table. and it's
Which,
gonna-
yeah, which is one of the things I highlighted, so,
Okay.
yeah. I just want to make sure we're going to be able to
We'll
talk
get a
about
red
all
line
of
version to
this.
make sure. yes.
Okay,
Is it
thank you.
But would that be on the
Yeah, that's
24th?
on that
Okay.
list.
the entire district use table?
That's-
Part of it
Is-
is.
Part of it is.
The prohibited use piece
The prohibited uses, yes.
is, and that's partially what John is talking about.
But not the entire use table.
We are not proposing changes to the entire district use
I
table.
think this is part of the problem, is that there are like 5 different things going on at the same
right.
time
Yeah.
that are proposing changes to the same sections of ordinance, so what you're seeing.
Yeah, they all kind of dovetail together.
Yeah, tell me about it. That, the document in front of you for this particular issue is making changes just for this issue, and then we've got another document that's making changes to the same section for a different issue, and then another document that's making changes to the same section for another issue. It's,
So,
There was no easy way to do this.
so will we get a use table with all the changes?
yeah.
That's
Well,
what John's.
Yeah, I don't want to, I don't want to
Ultimately,
have
at
just,
the end of the day, there'll be a use table that will,
But it's going to be done in sections.
it's being done in pieces.
Yeah.
June 24th, you will not be seeing a use table with major changes, just implementation of the R120
okay.
and cannabis, I guess.
That's
Because
what I
my,
understood.
just, but in prohibited, so
prohibited uses.
Yes.
here's my fear, is that because this is very complex and there's like 5 different pieces and they're all interconnecting, but we're only going to look at one specific one at a given time, I would hate to have something slide through the cracks that ends up being changed, which negatively impacts, my constituents who have called me and are upset about some of the proposed changes. So I just want to make sure that we are able to address all of them.
So, John, can I answer your question since I'm on the zoning update committee? and
Yes.
part of it? Exactly the issue that you're talking about, one of the things you have in front of you is a request to extend the nose, everything got turned to no, extend the nose, which was supposed to expire at the end of this month, till the end of November.
Yes.
The reason being, because exactly the situation that you're talking about was happening, because the zoning update committee was doing like this stuff, and then the planning board was doing this other stuff with Ashley, and then we realized that it was like going like this. So what we decided instead was that you're going to start getting from the zoning update committee and through the planning board, sections by, for lack of better description, zone. So in other words, pretty soon you're gonna get the waterfront zone, because that's one of the first ones that's been done, and it went to the the zoning update committee finished with it, it's been to the planning board. And so now there's a whole set of recommendations for the use table just for the waterfront zone.
Related to special use.
Relating to
That's important,
special-
that's important. So if you recall, we changed all the special use to no way back when.
Yeah.
So
When
they
the-
gave
when the
time to
state- when the
develop
state-
these.
yeah.
So now we're gonna get them piecemeal for those, we're gonna get special criteria for those special uses, or elimination of the special use.
But it'll be not just this was part of the problem.
more than that.
Doing the special uses separately from the rest of the ones that weren't special uses, that was part of the problem. So you'll get the whole zone, you'll get everything about the zone in like one packet,
Right.
I guess is the way to describe it. So when you get the waterfront, it'll be the yeses, the nos, and the s's, and then any other criteria and all this other stuff, anything that relates to it is gonna come to you in one packet. Because we were all kind of tripping over each other trying to do it the way we were doing it before. That's why we're asking you for the
And
extension.
correct me if I'm wrong, Trish, but some of the prohibited uses that we'll be looking at on the 24th are intended to be temporary because we don't have the language for the special use permit yet.
Yes, it's either we haven't come up with the language, or we haven't figured out, like, I'll tell you, one of them are electric charging stations, right? Commercial ones, right? Obviously, we need those, but we need a plan, because we don't want everybody who's got a business just to stick one in the middle of their parking lot, right? So we need to work with Ashley to come up with, okay, so for now, it's on going on the prohibited list till we come up with language. There's a few others that are on there because they're really high water users, and until we figure out from the public water suppliers what the situation is. We put them on nose because, you know.
So what you're saying is by November, theoretically, we should get a completed list. Like
We should be done with
You
this
should be done.
process.
You'll be getting them in,
Ashley's looking at me like,
you'll get them in tranches, but the goal is, you know, so maybe in July or August, you're gonna get a whole bunch, and then maybe in September, you'll get a whole nother batch. The goal is to do
We
it
have
that way.
different groups that are working
I
in
know.
the same sections on different
I know.
pieces. And so I'm trying the best I can to coordinate those as much as we can. So the zoning update committee was working in the use table on the waterfront district, and then the planning board is working in the use table on special use permits. And I had to grab what the zoning update committee was doing, pull it into the use table and get the planning board to respond at the same time to, because otherwise we would have been making changes.
Yep.
You know, alongside each other, not reflective of each
Yep.
other. So we're doing our best to keep folding these in together and
Okay.
as much as we can. But there are gonna be some places where we don't catch each other and it's gonna come in pieces.
So,
Be efficient.
thank you, I appreciate that. The next question I had is, obviously, as we're taking one swing of the bat here and looking at R60 for the most part, and the R80s and flipping those into R120s, is part of the project to look at, you know, expansion of, you know, if we're gonna make a bunch of properties legal non-conforming, we might as well look at the areas where there should be some economic development and make those legal non-conforming too, for things like general commercial, you know, or the pedestrian-friendly district as an example.
So the zoning update committee has been looking at the commercial districts. They're pretty well done with waterfront. They've looked at general commercial, and what we've been doing is at the same time that we're going through those use tables, we're basically flying over these districts using the zoning maps and the aerial maps and making decisions about what's staying zone, you know, or for recommending to the council and to the planning board, what is staying zoned as is and what we're recommending to change. So those
Yep.
are gonna come in pieces, and we're trying to do it zone by zone.
So, and then my last question, I know you touched on and talked about the conservation development project, it all sounds great. But knowing that it's gonna take us some time to get this implemented, hypothetically speaking, if a developer was in an R80 zone, could they come to the planning board with a conservation development project based on that density today? And start going through the plan process, or no?
No, because there's a moratorium until July 30th.
Okay.
Which is the reason that.
Once it expires, they could come forward with
I'm
that.
sorry, June 30th. But part of the reason you're getting this now, I mean, this work was meant to address the issues that were why we put
Basis of the
of the moratorium. So the idea is, and it's part of the reason we're in, you know, trying to get this all to you now, is so that anybody who wants to develop, the day after the moratorium's lifted, all the pieces will be in place for them to go into the planning office and.
So, just so we are clear with the public, so the moratorium ends June 30th, right? Everything's still R80 and R60.
no.
It depends
It depends on
what
what our
Hy-
decisions
hy-
are.
Hypothetically speaking, right, because I know we get public hearings and all this stuff, it's going to drag out.
No, we're gonna try to get it done.
So, but hypothetically speaking, let's say there's an overlap, moratorium ends, there is a window where somebody could come in under R80 and use this conservation development district to, you know, get the same, assuming this passes.
No.
Well, if it passes,
If it passes.
if it passes separate from the R80 and R120.
But
Theoretically.
But the problem with that is that a lot of the dimensional components of the conservation development are based on R120.
So you'd have to amend it if you're gonna.
We would have to,
separate them.
we would have to amend it and rewrite it and re-advertise it if you were gonna not support the R120 piece of it. So no, they wouldn't be able to.
Okay. It's just my fear, and again, this is something I've heard from constituents, that there are people who own larger lots that would like to make little subdivisions, and, you know, we threw the moratorium in, and now all of a sudden, we're going to change the rules by the time the moratorium's lifted.
But
So-
we were clear, the intent of the moratorium was
Yes.
to give us time to address the changes in state law that A required us to, and also to use this as an opportunity to really tie this into our comprehensive plan and our challenges around water and the like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
no
it was-
one who has a large lot isn't going to be able to. The difference might be that, maybe you could subdivide it into 17 houses today and, and in July, you could only subdivide it into 14 houses. I mean, part of what we are trying to do, honestly, is that number that you saw, that conservative number of, almost 4,000 additional single-family houses, not counting multi, and that's a conservative number, because it doesn't include multifamily or already property development. The question is, can the town handle another 6,000 single-family houses? And if it isn't, then we all might have to sacrifice a little bit, but nobody's gonna lose their right to develop their property. It's just a matter of maybe there's, slightly less lots than there would have been before.
And then, again, sorry to belabor the point, but there was a piece in here about zoning mergers. So if I own hypothetically two adjacent properties in R80, let's say, for some reason I was able to pick up the lot next to me, and then, collectively that's 4 or 5 acres, is that gonna force an automatic merger of those two properties? Is that what's on the table? No? Okay.
The state law changed the merger provision anyway, so you can't automatically merge lots anymore under state law.
Okay, so if something is already subdivided, then it is already subdivided, and it will stay subdivided until such time that the owner decides to merge them back together and
Yeah,
go to
well,
the planning board.
The state law merger provision changed to restrict you from merging if the properties are in common ownership, the same ownership, and one of them or both of them are not developed, and they're non-conforming to the zoning size, the only way the town can merge them is if the lot has to be, basically they have to prove that they are not, it's at 50% of the lots within
200 feet, yeah.
200 feet they have to essentially survey lots within 200 feet. It's not just a provision that says you are merged now.
Okay,
So they have to show, there's a process that you have to go through now, it's no longer just automatically merged.
If there are lots of record before the merger, they're gonna be lots of record, though.
Yes.
will that be problematic for us in the industrial park?
No.
No? Okay.
I just want to, so June 24th is the hearing. Everyone who's potentially getting a lot from R80 to 120, anyone who's going to get the 120 will get actual notice from the assessor, well, from the town, but based on the assessor's ownership and everything. So everyone who might be affected by this will get actual first-class notice.
Empty lots are.
That's a lot of letters, but
Are
yeah.
existing houses,
Lots or houses or anybody. It's most of the town. I forget, how many numbers do we have, Todd?
It's about 4,300 people, just under.
Or owners, or lots.
4,300 lots.
Lots.
Which somebody could own multiple lots.
Correct.
But each lot will
They're
get.
going to get notice anyways.
Yeah.
So there should be no surprises.
Anyone else? Thank you, guys. You did a lot of good work.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Ashley,
much.
Ashley, can you stay? We're going to do this.
I'm going to step out if you want. Well, do you want to do that?
I want to make a motion to move 8C as the next item on the agenda.
So moved.
Got a motion? Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor? Okay. So, did this because we have Ashley here now. Want to make best use of her time.
Can't be longer than the drive here.
So you have before you the proposal by Weston and Sampson that was provided to the North Tiverton Revitalization Strategy and Design, Revitalization Subcommittee, inclusive, and we reviewed it at our meeting last Wednesday. Made no substantive changes. There were a couple minor issues inclusive of, Ashley took the time to add page numbers to it, so you can reference it much easier than, that was an oversight. The bulk of this has to do with the background of Weston Sampson, some of their work examples and the like. And if you turn to page 62, that is where the actual project proposal is in place. And I'll let Ashley, would you like to give us a brief overview?
Sure.
Yeah, there we go.
Very much.
Can you pull the mic up, Ashley? Thanks.
So we provided this in response to the committee's RFP that they had issued. And on page 64 is where the scope of work begins. We laid out a series of tasks to essentially cover what the committee had asked for. Our task 1 would be the project initiation and management. This would go throughout the length of the project. Task 2 is an existing conditions analysis, which includes some data mapping and a site visit. Task 3, we would be looking at some redevelopment opportunities where we would work with the committee to choose specific sites, and those might be sites where we would work with specific stakeholders if there was an interest, where we would use we would work with them to basically come up with design, opportunities to show what could be done on specific parcels. We would work with the committee to choose locations that could be applied across different areas of the district. So we would suggest things like the streetscape example that you can see on the bottom of page 66, or places for infill development or redevelopment of specific parcels where these could be example properties that could be used to accompany each of these redevelopment opportunity sites. We would also provide a summary that goes along with these that would give the town a good idea of what the regulatory barriers were to achieving these redevelopment opportunities, so that these could then essentially be turned into action items for changing, regulatory framework so that you could actually achieve these redevelopment opportunities. We would also provide options for funding and implementation, and then we also have partnered with someone for an economic development analysis of the area to essentially give a good understanding of economically viable businesses, looking at the of the development regulations, really trying to get an understanding of what a viable market is in North Tiverton, so that you can, as the town, can make sure that you're essentially providing, what's necessary for these businesses to thrive in North Tiverton. Task 5 is what we're proposing for community engagement. We have a series of different opportunities for community engagement, including a project website, an online survey, some social media content that the town can use to promote the project, and certain events that would happen throughout the project. Some stakeholder meetings where we would work with the committee to identify property owners and business owners. We would meet with them directly to talk about key issues to owning businesses in North Tiverton and barriers to expanding or development in the area. And then we'd have 2 public events. And then also we would include a town council presentation for adoption, and then a final and draft report. A key part of the report would be an implementation section of the report that would mimic your comprehensive plan's implementation strategy, so that you could take the implementation action items from this North Tiverton master plan report and incorporate those into your comprehensive plan easily, so that you could then start to look at ways to take actions and implement the strategies and recommendations from the North Tiverton master plan.
Thank you, Ashley. Just a couple things. If you turn to page 62, it kind of highlights some of the key elements going into this that the committee wanted. We wanted to make sure that there was a high level of public engagement. Ashley identified the different public events and stakeholder groups as well. The website, a survey, interactive website that they would host for us to get feedback, information sharing across the board, across the community to really give and receive information, and doing something that is achievable, not something that's pie in the sky, but something that's achievable. It might be achievable in stages, but that can be done and is technically sound and innovative. I think also important is the philosophy and approach is really recognizing what's there, what the historical aspects are, and building on those, safety and accessibility, complete streets, to meaning, let's make sure we can walk, we can bike, we can drive our cars safely. Open space was a big thing, or green space. Really increasing the amount of passive and active recreational opportunities in that end of town. And then the economic vitality piece that Ashley touched on. The other piece with the redevelopment opportunities, if you notice, while there's an economic development analysis, that's not a full-blown market analysis. If we wanted to do that, we'd have to go back and, design a scope for that and get a different bid on that. But this would at least allow us to have a sense of what might be doable and workable. So then if you turn to the very back page, we had set aside $100,000 total for this project, but that was really, from my perspective, a placeholder because we had no idea what it might cost. So you'll see that the proposal is $136,500. That covers everything that's in this plan. If we wanted to do anything above and beyond, you'll see the hourly rates below that. That would come into play, but that's if we went above and beyond what's in this proposal. Our committee is suggesting that we seek another $60,000 from either casino money and/or ARPA money. I defer to Chris where that might come from. So, because that's going to cover the cost here, but then there are costs that the town will incur and has incurred some costs. They're not that significant, but we want to have somewhat of a cushion there just in case. So it would be an amount not to exceed whatever that amount is. So I would make a motion so we can discuss that the council accept the Weston and Sampson proposal for the North Tiverton Revitalization and Design Project and approve an additional $60,000 for the committee to use for this project to come from either casino and/or ARPA funds.
Do I have a second? Second. Discussion. Chris, where would it come from? What do you think?
At this stage, it would probably be ARPA money, because I want to get that off the books before long.
Okay.
And we've got some big decisions to do with gaming as it is.
Yeah. Yep. Any other questions? John?
There's not a conflict with you working on this project and also being essentially, for all intents and purposes, our planner, right?
I hope not.
Because I noticed you were part of the project team, that's why I asked.
No, there's not a,
No,
Not to my
Yeah,
knowledge,
I don't
there's
see any
no
conflict
issue.
Just gotta ask,
well, and remember, as a planner, she's not an
not
employee.
our.
She's paid for,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's a different project within,
Yes.
yeah.
yeah. Any other questions?
Just quick follow-up. I know when we first talked about this, I was opposed. Feels like we have a lot of stuff going on in this town. I appreciate that Weston and Sampson took the time to respond to the RFP, put together a very thoughtful proposal. I worry that we're gonna have cost runaways, because what started from 100 is now 160. If we come back a year from now, we need to throw another 150 at it. That worries me, especially with everything that we have going on budget-wise in this town.
But
So
they
so
got,
the only way we would add money to this proposal, would that actually, so again, this is an all-in cost, 136,000. If we decided as a committee to recommend to the council additional work, then the council would have, that would be an added cost that the council would have to decide whether or not to do.
So it couldn't be a runaway. The committee is fairly astute at maintaining a semblance of staying within budget, and that's why this RFP is there. It's kind of a guideline, but I do believe that, I don't see a runaway with this at all.
So what would the additional cost be for the town?
So we incurred some costs up, but start up immediately was some copying of comprehensive plans, zoning documents. There are a number of documentations that we had to supply to the committee. And quite frankly, some of the public members were asking for it as well too. So it was kind of unfair. I mean, we did subsidize some of it out of the initial 100,000. I don't think it was a lot of money. But I don't know what kind of printing, mailings, and those kind of things that that the town might incur as a result of trying to provide these public meetings, public venues, rental space, things like, I have no idea what that's gonna be like until we see what kind of size venues that we're gonna be looking at. So there may be some costs, we just don't have a full grasp as to what they're all at right now. But I think on a committee level, with the firm, we will come to some understanding as to what's going to be needed and whether or not there's enough resources available between the delta of what the bid is and what our request is.
Okay, one follow-up question. In the proposal here, it mentions that there's a annual rate increase of 3%.
I asked that same question, John. That's only if we did additional work.
Only,
So
okay.
this 136 is a firm number for the project.
So I just want to clarify, because I think it was a little confusing. The RFP requested that we provide the hourly
Yes.
rates for the individuals that we listed on our project team, which is this box at the bottom here. We're not proposing to charge you these hourly rates. Everything that we proposed in tasks, I think it's 1 through 6, that we said we were gonna do is included in that lump sum fee. I tried to make it clear in here, we provided these rates because you asked for them.
Got it.
We're not gonna up what we're charging you by 3% unless you come back to us and say, we'd like to add another public meeting.
Right.
You only included 2, we want to add a 3rd one, that's the only time these rates would come into play, or that 3% increase. Whatever we said we were gonna do in here, we're doing for that lump sum fee.
Okay,
That's it.
because on the prior page, it shows the timeline, and that obviously crosses over a 2-year period, so.
But that 3% increase only applies to those hourly rates for anything that you ask us to do that's not already stated in here that we're doing under this scope of work for that lump sum fee.
And John, their risk is if they underestimate it, let's say that she estimated that the technical leaders were gonna spend 10 hours, and they actually spent 15.
That's my
They eat
problem,
that.
not yours.
And also, we also discussed if we were to add something, you would look at who would be the most appropriate. So it doesn't
Yes.
mean that everyone comes to
No, and
those.
if the committees decided, we didn't get enough people at the first 2 public meetings, we really wanna have a 3rd public meeting, what can you do for a 3rd public meeting? We can talk about it, I could say, listen, I know, budget is an issue, I could grab one more person, that person and I could pull together a public meeting, this is what we could do it for. We would offer that to you, based on these hourly rates, and you would say yes or no, and then we would make that agreement separate from this. But everything that we said we're doing here, and like was said, if it takes my GIS guy, 4 more hours than I estimated, that's my problem, not yours.
And just to be clear, if the committee was gonna do something like that, like add another public meeting, because obviously we added 23,500 above what the project costs, would that be the committee who would go ahead and pull the trigger, or would they come back to the council
Come
for
back to the
approval?
Back to us.
And we'd be able to say, well, Chris hasn't had to spend all but five, he only spent 3,000 of that 23,000. So we can use that if if there's money in there to do that. But we come
Based on
back.
the scope of work that Weston Sampson's doing, it'll come back to the council.
Yeah, it has to come here.
Okay, just checking.
Any other questions? So I have a vote on, you want to keep going? You want
No,
me to?
I'm,
I have a vote on the floor in a second. Not a vote, a motion. All those in favor?
Yes.
David and Dennis.
David did too.
Do I need one to pin one up
Thank
here?
you.
Thank you.
We need
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need you for anything else?
I don't think so.
What's F? I don't see an F.
E.
My eyes are going.
No, we don't need her. No.
So I can do B.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna do B now, the USDA.
Thank you, Ashley.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm supposed to send you home too. Thank you, John. I can't send Stu home yet. Well, D, who's gonna do D?
It's just a referral, I am.
Okay, just wondering. Go ahead, B.
So
B.
on B, Chief Jones, Rick Rogers, myself, met with the regional staff for USDA regarding the landfill grant. They'd given me information back of the $2.1 million that we're requesting, that they were going to identify 2 pockets of what they considered to be reasonable, which was one was $465,000, and the other one was whether or not the town could substantiate another $419,000 of in-house work, which we clearly explained to them we could not, because we never anticipated doing this as a project at the time the storm took place. The landfill closure was underway. So I pressed with the regional office to provide us with a national technical assistance contract to put this grant project back together. The national office is in agreement with that. I'll be meeting with them in the next week. We're going to ask for what we believe to be reasonable cost as it relates to the storm, based on what Power Engineering had provided to the regional office that got rejected. So I don't think we're done with this. I do believe that it just needs to be looked at with a different set of eyes. The regional office has had some issues statewide, region-wise, as to not putting any money out. And I think that they're penalizing the town for something that's perceived to be a dispute between the town of Tiverton and USDA nationally. And I can get into that more a little bit when this thing finally gets to come to a head. But I can give you, for an example, that all of the wastewater monies for the state of Rhode Island, not one dime of it was spent in Rhode Island. The national office came and took 50% of the money away because it wasn't being used. Because they're not going out to the applicants like Tiverton Wastewater to push this money out to do projects that need to be done. At the same token, I believe they were penalizing the town of Tiverton. We have not received our annual grant that we get for our police cars, our other vehicles that we have gotten through USDA. We are the highest qualified community in Rhode Island to receive monies, and we've been shunted by the new administration in the regional office. But for some reason, and I don't know why, but I have worked this way through with the national office in DC, and if need be, I will fly to DC and talk to the director, because it should not be being treated the way we are. There was a storm. We can clearly articulate, there were 3 storms that were declared under the national emergency. Power Engineering, a separate entity altogether, it has nothing to do with our Public Works Department, has validated the quantity and validity of the exposure that we incurred. Even though we were closing the landfill anyhow, there was still cost associated with that. We qualify. This is an eligible project, and we've just been shunted by the regional office. The national office and the director of the office in DC is well aware of what's going on. Using a technical contractor for the USDA that's outside of that process will help facilitate getting this application back on track where it needs to be. My hope is that we get at least half of what we asked for. That's, you know, and I've been very upfront and honest with them. We're not asking for anything more than what we're entitled to. There was a declared storm, we had exposure, and we put those exposure costs out there. But the regional office has been refusing to help us put this application together for almost a year and a half now. So it's coming to a head. And last week was the first of many meetings we're gonna have to get this rectified. I do hope to have an answer with this within the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
That's that update.
D, discussion possible vote to refer to the planning board the proposed amendments to Appendix A, zoning article 4, district use regulations, section 15, prohibited uses regarding open lot storage. Storage to allow temporary open lot storage for approved public utility projects.
So this is a follow-up to the meeting that we had last month, or last meeting with the people from Rhode Island Energy, based upon their presentation and based upon comments I received from members of the council. We redrafted, or I redrafted some of the language. It's before you. The only thing, because this is a zoning change, it's a change of the zoning, it has to go back for the planning board for their recommendation. And then it'll come back to us for either amendment or approval, or whatever the council wants to do. Jacques is here. But I just hope that this is really just a procedural referring to the planning board.
So all I need is a motion to refer this to the planning board.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I still have a couple of problems. First and foremost, I think 36 months is a bit long. In my opinion, it should be 18 months, and the clock should start upon approval by the town council, and should continue without interruption, whether or not the site is actually used for storage. And we would stipulate that the council could extend this upon request and for cause. Additionally, it sounds like a storage area would be allowed anywhere in town. My question is, would this storage area need to be within close proximity to the project or far away from it? Also, could any landowner in town enter into a lease agreement with the utility solely for the purpose of creating storage? My concern is this could amount to allowing a business arrangement within a residential zone. I would also request that not just the building official, but the planning board and the Conservation Commission should weigh in on this and determine if the site is suitable or not. It will also require that all DEM stormwater runoff regulations be followed to the letter. Also, that we should clearly define what materials may or may not be stored at a site. And specifically, I would be worried about flammables such as gasoline, diesel fuel, or gaseous hydrocarbons like, gas. And after I thought this for a while, I would think that this storage would only be used for a project within the town limits. So they couldn't use it as storage for a project in Westport or Portsmouth or Middletown. And lastly, that a storage site could not be cleared of trees, or that no soil removal other than that incidental to storage would be allowed. And that would prevent anybody from creating a storage area to attract the utility company. And I have to say that at our last meeting, when I had a lot of these issues, and I sent them to Mike, and he addressed some of them.
So, first of all, we're now getting to the substantive, we're just referring this to the planning board.
That's all we're doing.
Your comments are welcome there, or welcome back when it comes back to us. This is temporary storage, it's not in every residential zone, it's clearly limited to those residential zones without the houses on it. So if you have a house and you just can't put board on it, and again, this is temporary storage, this is not permanent storage. This is for public utilities for permitted projects. But anyway, that's all that goes to the merits of it. I will say that the planning board does not get involved in enforcing the zoning ordinance. This is a zoning provision. They don't have any say on zoning issues. That's a building official. That's appealable to the zoning board. That's why I kept the planning board out of it. They really don't have any say. They just have to deal with development and land
You're
use.
asking for this to go to the plan.
No, I know, but they have to pass up the zoning, but he wanted them to enforce it. They don't enforce. The planning board does not enforce the
Okay,
zoning code.
all right, no,
That's
I
why,
know that.
that's why I didn't take that comment, because they don't enforce the zoning
you
code.
don't enforce it.
Building official, zoning official, which then is appealable to the zoning board. That's why that change was put in. But anyway, those are all substantive comments, all valid. Right now, it's just being referred to the planning board, and they can come back with the recommendation. And the council can figure out what they're gonna do with it again. But again, this was, you sort of heard the presentation from around energy, and that's where we're at.
Just, I have similar reservations, maybe not the exact same, but I do want to hear what the planning board has to say on this.
Okay. Do I have a motion and a second to pass it along to the planning board? All those in
It's just,
favor?
it's going to the planning board for recommendations, review,
Yeah.
revisions, okay.
Did you vote yes?
As long as it's for all of that,
Yeah.
and not as
It's
it's
their
written
legal
here.
duty under the
They have to get it.
statute.
Yeah, they have to
Yep.
get it.
They have to weigh in on it.
Yes,
All
okay,
right.
then yes.
Authorization for the town clerk, planning department to advertise proposed amendments to the town's comprehensive community plan for public hearing on June 24th, 2024 to conform with proposed zoning changes.
So this is something that came up when we were discussing the zoning changes that are before on 624. Because they're pretty extensive changes, we have to amend the comp plan to reflect those changes. I think Todd has come up with the advertising language. So you can't amend zoning law until you amend the comprehensive plan to make sure that the zoning law is consistent with the comp plan. So that's what we're doing, and so we kind of caught this at the last minute, but luckily we have enough time to advertise. So that's what we're asking the clerk to do. So on 624, you'll see amendments to proposed amendments to the comprehensive plan that hopefully conform to the
Match
zoning
with
code
this,
convention.
okay.
Really technical issue.
I move approval of the advertisement.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Okey dokey. All right, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session. Town Administrator, Rhode Island General Law 4246, 585, discussion and possible vote on sale, disposition of public held property in the Tiverton Industrial Park. Town solicitor, update on donation of privately owned properties to be donated to the town of Tiverton, potential vote to accept deeds. Town solicitor, Rhode Island General Law 4246 582, litigation discussion and possible vote regarding final consent judgment on the tax assessment matters, Twin Rivers, Tiverton LLC, v. David Roberts, tax assessor. Town administrator, Rhode Island General Law 46 582, collective bargaining discussion possible vote on IAFF Local 1703, Tiverton fire contract negotiation. Town administrator, Rhode Island General Law 42 46 5A, litigation, potential and new litigation regarding Tiverton Fire Department, David McGovern, ETALV, William S. Bailey, the third ETAL 24 CV 0199.
One more.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just didn't remember that. Town Administrator, Rhode Island General Law 4246 5A, any investigation proceeding regarding allegations of misconduct, either civil or criminal, Tiverton Fire Department.
So
I move
moved.
it. There you go.
Second, yes.
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 All right, so I'm going to take a short break while we